This video is not going to be at nearly the level of educational rigor of some of the stuff I've recently posted on the channel, but frankly, some of that stuff has kind of painted me into a corner a bit. Now I feel like every single video has to teach the viewer something completely new that they couldn't possibly have known before. And so it's tough to motivate yourself to make content when there's that much of an expectation you're placing on yourself. So, just to do something totally off the cuff and get myself out of my mental block, I figured we'd do something really just plain silly today. I have these 3 mouthpieces. None of them have a single mark of engraving on them. They're total oddballs, but I figured we would plug each of them into my King 3B Silversonic and just see what happens. How's it going, everybody? It's your host, Sam here, and let's waste no time in introducing today's contestants. Subject A. This may look to you like a CG Con mouthpiece, the kind of thing that would have been manufactured starting around the mid-50s going through, I don't know, let's say the 80s or 90s. But again, no markings whatsoever, and it's quite a lot smaller than most modern trombone cups you would find. Certainly anything like the Con 3 would be much larger than this. This thing's inner diameter really is down there on the bottom end, kind of around a Bach, like 18 to 22, or like a Schilke 40. It's really quite small. The cup is fairly, I would say it's V-shaped along the sides, and then it comes into either a more shallow V or a more rounded sort of bottom to it. It's not a double cup by any means, but it does have kind of 2 shapes there. We might call it a hybrid cup. And something interesting is that this shank here doesn't taper inward quite as much as one would expect of a standard mouthpiece. If you put it into a standard small shank receiver, there is just the tiniest bit of wobble up at the top, meaning the bottom of the mouthpiece is a little too wide and doesn't seat far enough, but the top of the mouthpiece is not quite wide enough. It's not that much lateral wiggle, but it is just enough to suggest that maybe this was designed for a German baritone shank. Also, this is quite a bit darker than regular silver plating, so I suspect it's either nickel or perhaps rhodium, like the old Herco mouthpieces. Those things are awful, by the way. Subject number 2 looks an awful lot like what jazz trombonist Nick Finzer uses. I haven't seen the inside of his cup, I'm only talking externally. This is quite a weird one on the inside, though. This thing, I don't know what sort of adamantium it could possibly be made out of. It looks like something that has a fair bit of copper, but what the rest is, be it silver, nickel, who really knows? Maybe it's some sort of sterling silver or cupro-nickel sort of alloy with a little bit more copper than usual. It's really tough to tell. I can't tell even if it's maybe plated with something. It feels a lot smoother than most raw metals I know, but it definitely is an oddball. I really can't tell much of anything about the material on this one. The inner diameter of this one is definitely small, but not nearly as small. We're kind of more in Bach like 12 to 15 territory, but the cup is where things start to get interesting, because we have an initial very shallow bowl, and then sort of a rounded transition into a second V cup. So this is a double cup mouthpiece, and quite a pronounced one at that. Definitely when you look down into it, there's sort of a dark spot in the center that suggests a cup going way down further than the initial slope, and then it goes into the throat, as you would expect. This one fits into a small shank receiver with the least complaints, no wiggle to speak of, and a decent insertion length. And now subject C, the one I've had for by far the longest time. I got this thing way back in high school and had no use for it whatsoever, but neither did the person who had it before me. This thing was silver plated at one point. You can see vestiges of it in the most odd spots, but yeah, probably 95 to 98% of the silver on it is completely gone, revealing what looks almost like copper underneath. It definitely is a little bit too red to be brass. I mean, it looks fairly brown right now, but I polished it a few months back when it was really, really brown, and it came out kind of pinkish red, so that made me think copper. It's a much more reasonable size as far as daily driving is concerned, where the inner diameter is about a Bach 4 or 5, and the depth is similar. I would say the cup shape is also pretty similar to the 5GS, somewhere in there. So it's also relatively similar to the Schilke 52, although I think it's a little bit deeper than that. The Schilke no-letters are actually not quite as deep as one might expect. And then the throat on it is also quite large. So this is almost vaguely a classical size, but the rim, I should mention, has a slight concavity to it. It has a sort of an inward contour, and it really just, it wraps around your chops so nicely. This is, I don't want to play on it much. I'd really need to get it replated if I wanted to, but it is a weirdly comfy mouthpiece. The trouble is, it doesn't fit a standard small shank super well. It's not to the point of being a Euro shank or a medium shank, but it is just that little bit too wide. It doesn't wobble, so this taper here is a true Morse taper, but yeah, it's just a little bit too big. Now, before we proceed any farther with this video, I'd like to make a quick announcement. If you haven't checked out my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass, link in the description and in the card up in the top right corner there, I would really appreciate if you did so. The reason I announce it on this video in particular is because, actually while filming this video, I got a little carried away and ended up waffling on for a very extensive amount of time about my history with each of these three mouthpieces and how they wound up in my collection and what their use has been since, and it really just felt like too much for this video, but this ties into my Patreon. I figured that that little story, and others like it when I ramble a little too much in my video, would be fun as extended cuts or little exclusive segments for my Patreon page. So if you go, once again, to patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass and select the $5 tier or up, you'll be guaranteed access to not only other perks like early access, but exclusive content on the channel. So if you, for whatever sick and twisted reason, particularly enjoy my musings and ramblings, once again, patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass is the ticket. And with that, let's get back to our normal programming. So with these three mouthpieces, none of which I particularly was looking to attain, but rather just fell into my lap somehow, I really hadn't used any of them to any great extent. So I figured the first thing I would demo is the same excerpt back to back on all three mouthpieces so we can really observe the subtle differences between them. At this point, if you haven't already, I really recommend getting some earbuds or headphones and listening with those, as that's going to give you by far the best sound assessment moving forward. So of course I think the most significant difference in sound is between the two really small inner diameters and fairly shallow cups, and the one fairly large inner diameter and fairly deep cup. Big surprise, right? There are some subtle differences between the two smaller ones, which we'll explore in excerpts to come. I also figured I would test out some of the low notes on each of them, since they all behaved quite differently. Subject A was just so airy and thin down there. I mean, it's just such a small mouthpiece. The rim also is fairly narrow in addition to the inner diameter, so the whole external diameter of the mouthpiece just doesn't sit right at all with me. I tried to maybe einsetzen it a little bit more, like a French horn mouthpiece, just completely sitting on top of the bottom lip, but nothing really worked to actually center the notes to the degree I wanted, and the pedals were ridiculously airy. Subject B did a little bit better. There were certainly better slots in that mid-low register down to that pedal B flat, but then once again the pedals got obscenely airy the further out I moved my slide. It's really not a low register mouthpiece either, as it would happen. Subject C, though, is ridiculous in the low register. For the record, I have plans to get rid of all three of these. I don't want to keep any of them around. I mean, I'm just gonna put them up for some pittance on Reverb and hope that somebody can put them to use better than me. But the thing is, Subject C is so good down there and so just loud that I almost want to keep it around just in case I need to play stupidly low on my 3B for whatever reason. Of course, I can't imagine it's that much better than just like a regular Bach 5G, but nonetheless, I was really surprised. And I don't like it on trumpet by any means, but on trombone, I do kind of like that inward rim contour that it has. So to really more closely examine each of these mouthpieces and their strengths and weaknesses, I've decided to do one additional different excerpt on each to really showcase what it's about. Subject A here, like I said, very small cup, very uncomfortable for me to play on, and you can't put a lot of power into it, that's for sure. That was the biggest thing I noticed. I tried to play some, high and loud type stuff, and I was really struggling to put any oomph into the sound. Normally, with such a small inner diameter, you can really cut holes in the wall and really play up to the top of your range with no issue. But this, it definitely is more suited to kind of playing with a soft and thin, sort of whispery, papery sort of sound in the upper register. If you do want to be a buzzsaw and drill holes in the wall, Subject B is definitely your top pick there. It makes sense. A lot of the mariachi or banda valve trombonists, they will use mouthpieces that look just about exactly like this on the inside. That really, really shallow initial cup, and then a double cup, a little deeper one on the inside. A lot of them will use Pardubas and, the true authentic double cups, not whatever this stupid thing is. But nonetheless, like I said, this one makes that sound of tearing sheet metal if you really wanted to, and it definitely plays up there. I had to get significantly warmed up on this one before I could do it compared to the Subject A, but yeah, this thing definitely does it. Subject C really brought out my penchant for jazz ballads. I really like the sound this thing gets, and again, it is so comfy to play on because of that rim contour, especially transitioning down to the low register. It really is just a strange amount of fun to play on. I also do wonder if this blank, likely being something like copper, is helping the mouthpiece to sound quite a bit darker than it otherwise would. It actually is a whole bunch of factors. You've got the relatively deep cup and the fairly large throat, but that inward rim contour, it also kind of darkens your sound in a way. Something I've noticed is that when you have such a contour, it kind of promotes more lip engagement, like your lips almost go deeper into the cup and are more, I guess, furled out to some extent than they would normally be. And don't get me wrong, this is very inefficient for when you're trying to play high, and I did find this to be fairly restrictive up high, but it really just results in the darkest, fluffiest sort of sound that you can get on this inner diameter and this deep of a cup. Well, like I said, of course this isn't an educational video by any stretch compared to some of my other mouthpiece spotlights or instrument reviews. This is really just 3 totally random mouthpieces, none of which you're going to reliably be able to A, find on the market if you want one, or B, actually find any information about. And my process for this was pretty informal, but I tried to measure out each one a little bit, and play some different excerpts on each one, and honestly, it was fun to find out whatever I could about these 3 total oddballs. I don't plan on keeping any of them, as much fun as Subject C really is, but nonetheless, I wanted to show them off on the channel, and now that I have done so, I'll feel better about selling them and getting rid of them. I have nothing left to gain from them. So I hope you enjoyed this video and got something out of it too, even if it wasn't necessarily educational value. If you want to see more Mouthpiece spotlights, generally much more involved and educational than this, then make sure to leave a like and a comment down below, and check out my Mouthpiece Spotlight playlist in the top right corner in the card. Until next time, I appreciate you sticking around, and we'll see you on the flip side. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to support the creation of bigger and better content on the Samuel Plays Brass channel, have your name featured right here, and a whole host of other perks and benefits, then please consider pledging your support at patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass. For now, you can find more videos in the end screen cards to my left.